We've come a long, long way together, through the hard times and the good. I have to celebrate you, baby. I have to praise you like I should.
Good morning! Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Experiment as much as possible. I mean, like, keep pulling the thread on what people want to use it for. I'm a big believer in, I think it's less about free speech. I think it's more about, do we get to choose how the algorithms are programming us? Because the algorithms are definitively
See, as you can see, the more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
Each one had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the dark? Each one in the room of his idols. For they say, Yahuwah does not see us. Yahuwah has forsaken the land.
All right, happy Thursday. I'm thinking about AIs and stemming from this podcast from Lex Friedman. And I'm dreaming of a conversation I'd love to hear happen from different traditions that have been influential in me. I'm following around this guy, this Dr. Michael Martin, lately. He's going to teach me about William Blake's Jerusalem this coming Saturday and for the next 8 weeks. I'd love to hear from Eric Davis from like a psychedelic counterculture perspective, and I'd love to hear from Andrew McLuhan at the McLuhan Institute, who, from a media ecology perspective. I think those three opinions would be really fun to hear wrestle around. So make it happen, boys. Happy Thursday.
Controls. So then you step it forward to like, what have they done over the last 4 years since then, right? Obviously, they've continued to operate the hedge fund, probably make tons of money. And the other thing is that they've leaned more and more and more into AI. The CEO, Lian Feng,
you're not putting me spot on this. We discussed this before.
Lian Feng, right? The CEO, he owns maybe Lian Feng. He owns maybe a little bit more than half the company, allegedly, right? Is an extremely like Elon Jensen kind of figure where he's just like involved in everything, right? And so over that time period, he's gotten really in depth into AI. He actually has a bit of a like a if you see some of his statements, a bit of an EAC vibe almost, right?
Total AGI vibes. So like, we need to do this. We need to make a new ecosystem of open AI. We need China to lead on this sort of ecosystem because historically the Western countries have led on software ecosystems, and he straight up acknowledges like, in order to do this, we need to do something different. DeepSeek is his way of doing this. Some of the translated interviews with him are
So he has done
fantastic.
interviews?
Yeah.
Do you think he would do a Western interview or no? Or is there controls on the
There
chat?
hasn't been one yet, but
He might not have looked it, but the man who wrote Jerusalem was the original rebel artist. William Blake had a visionary imagination that led many of his contemporaries to call him mad. And yet, he was also a man rooted in reality, mixing symbolic images with powerful portraits, full of outrage at the injustices of the world. The prints on display in the Blake Room at Tate Britain plunge you into his unique and strange universe. William Blake was born during the Enlightenment, the so-called Age of Reason, but he spent much of his life railing against the idea that reason should be allowed to dominate human existence. For him, the whole point of life was to open yourself up to the infinite, the divine, the world of the spirits. What really counts is the imagination. And for Blake, the great enemy of the imagination was the spirit of calculation, of cold logic. For him, that was embodied by Newton. And here he shows Newton in this famous colour print, squatting weirdly on the ocean floor, obsessed by his own rationality. And he can't even appreciate the wonderful mottled colours and beauty of the rock on which he sits. When he was a child growing up in London, Blake saw a vision of angels in a tree. And throughout his life, visions were part of his everyday reality.
He was a man out of time. He was living in a romantic, visionary world where he thought that the things inside his head were as important as things in the material universe, which is something that's a belief that I share.
Blake saw himself as a kind of prophet as well as a writer and artist, and that's why he chose to revive an ancient form, that of the hand-illuminated book. He only produced a handful in his lifetime, but they're among the most strange, powerful, wonderful objects in all of British art, and they've got a wonderful collection of them here in the British Museum's Department of Prints and Drawings. This is one of Blake's lesser-known prophetic books. It's called Europe, a Prophecy. Here you've got one of his most famous pictures, The Ancient of Days, and again it expresses beautifully that sense of ambiguity that Blake has towards any authority figure. In this case, God, man's creator, is also perhaps man's jailer. What I also like about this book is the way in which it gives you the two poles between which Blake's imagination oscillates. On the one hand, that grand language of symbolic art squeezed within the pages of a single book. But Blake can travel so easily from that to the problems of his own time. Here we've got this figure in shackles while his horrible lizard-skinned jailer holding a huge key sneaks off up the stairs. It's a brilliant image of Blake's belief that the common people of England did indeed live in chains. Blake was pretty much ignored in his own time, but his combination of political radicalism and visionary ideas made him something of a poster boy for the 60s generation.
Blake has a great line in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell about cleansing the doors of perception. It was taken up by Aldous Huxley later, and it seemed to the 60s generation to mean, you know, if you took hallucinogenic drugs, you could cleanse your vision.
William Blake was possibly so far ahead of his time that it took us until the 1960s before we had the faintest idea what he was on about.
He was a man who was not acclaimed in his own lifetime, but he just kept on and on and on, and now, a century later, or 2 centuries later, we recognise what a genius he was.
Now these are the songs of innocence and the songs of experience. Like a lot of people, I expect, I came across this for the first time in English lessons at school, but of course, because we like to keep everything very neat and tidy in our education, I just experienced these poems as words on a printed page. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? And when you see them in the flesh, you see how he uses images, and he uses the whole concept of the illuminated book to set words free from their literal meanings, turning the letters into leaves and tendrils, so it's as if the words are sort of growing out from the limitations of the page. I've got an example here of the block that he would have used to hand print these books. It's a wonderfully touching thing. So you imagine an image no bigger than your hand.
To him, everything was sacred. Everything was exploding with visions. The way that he printed, the techniques that he used, all of these were of immense significance to him.
William Blake had this very strong notion of prophecy, and printmaking was a way of revelation for him. So the prophecies he made were revealed through the print process. Taking the final print, it's the moment of truth. Something is exposed which wasn't seen before. So there's this very mystical and very beautiful process that involved there.
There is something rather magical about the William Blake story. A man neglected in his own time, but ultimately granted a glorious immortality. His reputation was it became like embers. It was kept alive by the circle of his initiates, and they found those embers, and gradually, by the 20th century, he'd become this great figure, just from these little images. For me, his work's like a call to arms. Forget shopping and shallow materialism. Blake says, embrace a life of creativity, experiment, imagination. 250 years on, it's a message well worth celebrating.
And when it came down to me and my role, well, it hurt to know that I purchased them on my own.
The industrial landscape were already coming into being as the outer reflection of the materialist ideology which was to prevail during the next century and beyond. Blake's phrase, the dark satanic mills, by the way, does not apply to what we think of as mills. It applies to the Newtonian system, to the idea of the universe as a mechanism. And the mills are, as it were, the clockwork of a material mechanism which is not informed by a spiritual vision. And of course we understand them are a reflection of that very ideology.
Doctor, my eye.
Okay, happy Monday, week 1 of William Blake's Jerusalem, the emanation of the giant Albion. Holy hell, man.